Welcome to the third episode of season 2 of the 1960s Project. The 1960s Project brings you voices from the 1960s. My name is Jerome, Paige, and I'm your host for today's episode. We'll be recalling, remembering, and reflecting on events that have influenced our lives. Before I introduce today's show, I have 3 asks. Ask number 1 is like and follow us on Facebook. Ask 2 is subscribe to our YouTube channel. Ask 3 is to read and comment on the blogs. There's a rule of thumb that generational trauma can exist for at least 5 generations. That means if we start today, we can create a new script for our family and others to break the effects of the trauma we're experiencing today. Yes, we can break a curse. One way to think about passing on something generationally is to count the number of generations you know firsthand. For me, I know I knew 3 of my 4 grandparents. I know both of my parents. I know me, obviously. I know my daughter. So my grandparents would be 1 generation. My parents would be 2 generations. I would be 3 generations. My daughter would be 4 generations. My grandnieces and nephews would be 5 generations. And once my grandnieces and nephews are of age to have children, that will be 6 generations for me. So I bridged the gap for 6 generations. So when we're talking about generational trauma and breaking that trauma, it becomes very real. One of the ways in which we can turn things around is to pass on the lessons we've learned in our generation. And that's what we'll be doing in this show. We'll be holding a conversation across generations. Lewis Hicks will be sharing his life lessons with his great-grandnephew, Jourdan Hamilton. So let me welcome Lewis and welcome Jourdan.
Thanks.
Hello. How are you both?
Hey, we're good.
Great. So Lewis, let me start off by asking you a very personal question. You ready?
Yep, I am.
How old are you?
I'm 69. I always have to calculate that.
So at 69, how many generations of your family do you have or have had firsthand knowledge of? Did you know your great-grandparents?
Yes.
So that's 1 generation.
My mother's grandmother.
Okay. So you know your grandmother.
Yes.
That's 2 generations. Obviously, you know your parents.
Uh-huh.
That's 3 generations. Then there's you. That's 4 generations. And then your sisters or brothers have kids?
Yes.
That's 5 generations.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Jourdan with you, which we'll talk to you. That's 6 generations.
Mm-hmm.
And does Jourdan have any kids?
No, but his siblings have kids.
So
his cousins have kids.
Okay, so you got 7 generations that you have firsthand knowledge of.
That's right.
Oh, okay. You keep going. If you live long enough, you're going to be your own family tree, man.
Okay, all right.
So Jourdan, how old are you?
I am 27 coming up this March.
Okay. So how many generations do you have firsthand knowledge of?
There's 2 below me,
Mm-hmm.
my sisters, and I know my great-grandfather I know my great-grandfather's generation on both sides.
All right, so both of you have a lot of generations. So when you pass, you're receiving information and you're passing information down over 6, 7 generations. So to the extent that we can change behavior or address issues today, then that, first of all, releases the spirit from the past and also creates a new spirit going forward. So this whole thing of generational memory or generational trauma has a very significant and very personal impact once we look at it that way. And we're going to talk more about Lewis's background and Jourdan's background, and we'll do that through this, what we call the conversations across generations. Lewis has written a blog, and the blog is in the form of a letter to his grandnephew, Jourdan. So, and Lewis, you divided your letter into 4 categories.
Yes.
One is planning.
Uh-huh.
The second is financial independence and freedom.
Yep.
The third is self-care.
Uh-huh.
And the fourth is giving back and paying forward.
That's right.
Okay, so let's start with planning. How did you come to discover the importance of planning as a lesson or a message to send out to your great nephew?
I think probably one of the reasons it was really important was because I had to learn a lot of stuff on my own. And then as I tried to map out the course of my career, as well as also how my dad got me into college, I realized that you have to have some incremental steps as well as looking at your goal. So being a Virgo that I am, I always need to have order to things in my life. And so that was part of it. I realized kind of early and not really being cognizant of the steps I was taking that I need to put things in place in order to move forward to reach my goal.
Okay, I didn't bone up on my astrological signs for this session, but
Okay.
tell me about a Virgo. Why is that? Why was it significant to mention that you're a Virgo?
Virgos are generally detailed oriented, and so I'm very methodical, and I like things neat and orderly. And so in order for me to think about my life, I had to put some kind of order to it. So I had to have some steps, and I had to follow a procedure, and I had to see how I can get from one place to the other, and also have some vision of what was down the line. So put a target in front of me, and how do I get there? And I need to have materials and tools like learning archery. You had to know how to pull it back and then shoot to your target and see how close you miss it.
Yeah, we in an earlier Facebook Live and in an earlier blog, you mentioned about growing up in Austin, Texas, and going on to college. In that blog, you mentioned that the first part of your academic career and your professional career, there was no planning.
That's right. Basically, I was just kind of following what I thought moved me just automatically into where I needed to go. Because without having a counselor tell me specifically that this is how you need to get into college beyond just taking SATs or ACTs to get the right score, I just thought, okay, you go to college, you go through your courses, you get out of school, and then you graduate and you get a good job, because the commercial always said to get a good job, get a good education, go to college. So that was my path. That's as much as I knew.
So you thought the commercial, you listened to the commercial, and it was your sense that things would just unfold.
Yeah, exactly.
But out it didn't happen that way.
Nope.
Okay, so give us just a brief snapshot. So you go from high school to college. Was that planned or unplanned?
It was pretty much planned. My dad said, son, do one thing for me, go to college, get 1 year of education, see what the college life is all about. And so that's what I wanted to do. I always had that aspiration to go to college. I was in the marching band. The picture that you see now, that was at my high school, L.C. Anderson High School, which is now a community college, but I was part of the band. And my aspiration was to go to college and to basically have be a successful person. I didn't have a real clue of what I was going to do because I was an undeclared major when I first got in. And so as an undeclared major, I took liberal arts courses. And then eventually, because I thought that I liked personality and understanding people, the Virgo, reading astrology through the newspaper. My mom used to read the astrological little segments that were inserted in the newspaper. So I always was fascinated to read those and see whether or not they matched and how they predicted personality. So declaring myself as a psychology major, that helped me kind of on the road to thinking that I was going to be a psychologist after I graduated with a 4-year degree. Little did I know.
What happened? Did you?
No.
I mean, you graduated, but
I graduated. I was confronted by the fact that finally, I don't know how I came to the realization that you needed a graduate degree in order to be a psychologist. And so coming right out of school, I needed a job. So I looked around, and the easiest thing I found, or the quickest way, was to be a substitute teacher. And so I applied to the school district in Austin and got jobs going for temporary placement at local schools in the city.
So what parts of your academic and professional career were planned and which parts were unplanned?
Going to, once I became a museum director right out of school after I got my second degree, I started to kind of scope out what was needed to advance in the museum profession, as well as also get training. I attended workshops throughout the year and over the course of my career in Austin, going to seminars sponsored by the Texas Historical Commission, the African American Museum Association, the American Association of Museums, as well as the Getty Museum Management Institute. So I had scoped out through conversations with friends, as well as reading literature, that also, out of necessity too, I had to seek training to learn the kinds of things, because I basically entered the museum profession with no experience as a museum professional, nor had I ever stepped foot in a museum because of segregation. They didn't allow Black people to go into museums in Texas. So I went completely devoid of any kind of real training. And so because of the mentorship of the director of the public library, the assistant director, my immediate supervisor at the George Washington Carver Museum, they basically guided me through the steps that I needed in order to open our first exhibition after 3 months of me being on the job.
Under your heading planning, you have 7 tips, right? First one says seek guidance. So when you're talking to in your letter, you're writing to Jourdan, and you indicate that planning is important, and then so seek guidance. Why is seeking guidance an important lesson, or important tip, important lesson to learn, or important tip for Jourdan?
A lot of times, you may know a little bit of information, but you don't necessarily have all the things that you need to know in order to execute a job. So it's important to seek mentors. For one, I talk a little bit later in the letter about people that have the knowledge that you need, and they can also guide you through. One example of that, because I was able to travel to the East Coast when I first started my job after about 3 years, I came and did an inspection tour of museums on the East Coast. I went to the Anacostia Museum here in Washington as part of that itinerary. Then I traveled on to the Rhode Island Black Historical Society in Providence, Rhode Island. Then I went on to the National Museum of African American Artists in Boston, where Barry Gaither was there. And each one of them, the directors of each one of the centers became my mentors, as well as Joy Ford Austin, who was at that time the executive director of the African American Museum Association. Those people served as my mentors anytime I had a issue like how do you fill out or how do you create a accession form to bring in artifacts to the museum. They referred me to one of our people at the African Americans at the National Museum of American History, and she helped me develop a loan form as well as an accession form to bring in documents or bring in artifacts to the museum. So it was the consulting people that were already in place. And so it's important for you to reach out to people to help you hone your skills as well as help you know what you don't know.
Before we go on, let me say hello to Okella, who's tuned in, and Charmaine and Anna and David. And maybe we can ask them to, as we're talking about your lessons that you're going to pass on, maybe they can post a lesson or two that they would like to pass on to a future generation.
Okay.
Another one was value yourself. This is under your planning. What do you mean by value yourself, and why is it important for Jourdan to value himself?
Because a lot of times I developed a low self-esteem as an African American in Austin, Texas. White culture was valued. I didn't really have a good sense of who I was as a Black person because our family talked about, well, we got together for Juneteenth. I didn't really have a good sense of what Juneteenth was all about, even though we celebrated it. But I thought as Americans, we were fully American. But at the same time, growing up with racism, you're not given the affirmation that you're a completely 100% true American because you're a Black person that's not allowed to go into restaurants. You're not allowed to buy property. You're not allowed to move in neighborhoods that you want to. Your family, I remember one incident where we were taking my sister back to college in the 1960s, going back to Prairie View A&M, and we were told that we can't come in the front door of the restaurant, but my grandmother, my mother, and my siblings had to go into a back storeroom, eat our food that we had paid for, and then go back out and not be able to sit in the dining room, even though it was just a roadside cafe. It was not really anything luxurious or anything, but it basically reinforced the fact that you're a second-class citizen. So through friends and through reading and also affirmation and also having a spiritual base, I realized that you have to have confidence and believe in yourself as a person worthy of self-respect.
All right, so seek guidance, value yourself, be an expert. Why is it important to be an expert?
Because people seek you out. If you're going to do something, do it really well. My dad always told me if there's something you're going to do, anything worth doing is going to be difficult. So try to be the best you can at what you do.
And another one under that, another third or fourth one under the 7 there is dream. So seek guidance, value yourself, be an expert, dream. Why is it important? Why is that an important message for Jourdan?
I think Jourdan is kind of on the path, and I really admire his tenacity as well as his aspiration to be an artist. And that's one of the reasons I invited him to come to Washington from Houston and live with me, because you need to have goals and aspirations. If you just think that the best that you can do is to get a waiter's job or be a workman, or that you can't do anything. If you don't have a dream to put before you, you can't really reach it. So you have to dream and think about some of the things that you want to do. And the best way to achieve a dream is to have it in front of you.
Let me bring Jourdan in and put him on the spot. So Jourdan, your uncle said you're an artist. You told us you're 26 years old. So lean forward to the camera and share a little bit about your background.
26. I have become a self-taught artist. I've started a few projects here and there, and really taken my career to a professional level since I've met him, and he's been mentoring me. It's really helped me like grow into something bigger than what I was before.
And where were you before? I mean, geographically, where were you living before?
I lived in it was around Houston, Texas, that area.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Austin, so growing up, that was my background. Then moving to Houston, it was a lot bigger. It was a city. I got used to living there.
And then you moved from Houston to Washington, D.C.?
Yes.
Okay. And when did you decide to become a self-taught artist? And what is your artistry? Is it written, or is it film or video? What?
No. It was around 4 years ago. I decided I'm going to do art. This is, one of the passions that I have in life. I do digital art, comic books, and animation. Okay. So I mix all of these styles into creating really unique products and different effects for people.
So your uncle mentioned seek guidance, value yourself, be an expert, dream. How do you think his advice would resonate with people in your cohort, people who are 26 years old?
I think those are really important lessons that should be taught more now, because a lot of people don't dream anymore. And that's kind of a sad thing on my generation, where people will stop or they'll settle down and they won't live their life to a bigger potential.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And we have some comments in the chat box here. One is from Anna, which says, give yourself permission to do what you love, especially in your career. So, Jourdan, it sounds like at some point you decided to give yourself permission to do what you love, and your uncle is supporting you along the way.
Yes.
Is that a fair assessment? Great. So, if Jourdan, if you were giving advice to somebody about planning, what would you say?
I would definitely say study up on what you're planning for, so you can get all the steps in line. And once you have that, you just knock away until you have achieved your goal, whatever it is.
All right. Are you astrologically inclined too? Are you being driven by a sign as well?
Yeah, I do have an astrological tinge.
And what's your astrological tinge?
Well, I'm a Pisces.
Okay.
So it's kind of that dual, that light and dark thing going on there.
Right.
So I do feel like balance is very important to everything. Mm-hmm. But it's once you do the right things of getting everything set up for how you want it and doing it, then you can go through actually executing it and doing it. So there's two different phases that you got, and you can't get them confused, the planning and the execution.
Okay, great. So let's move on to your second bucket, Lewis. The first bucket was planning, and you talked about the importance of that, mainly because at points in your academic career and your professional career, you, quote unquote, looking back, you could have benefited more had you planned better or had someone to guide you.
Uh-huh.
So under the financial independence / freedom, what are you including under there? What's the big takeaway for why you would give some advice to a future generation that it's important to consider this category called financial independence / freedom?
Retirement, looking at your when you're ready to stop working. Savings are one of the things. Investments beyond just a savings or checking account, and real estate. A lot of times, our family property gets away from us because it was easily given to them. So, say you inherit your grandmother's house, and because you inherited, and you are struggling just to make your rent, you will think that this is great. I can pay my rent off for 6 months, and then I can go out and buy a brand new car, and I can get some new clothes. But you don't realize that the value that family assets provide stability. And one of the reasons that my siblings and I decided to invest in buying houses, each one of us own our own homes, is because we lived in the projects all our life. Our grandmothers owned their houses. As a matter of fact, my my paternal grandmother built her house from scratch. It started out as a one-room house that she continued to add on to room by room until it was probably a 5-room house, even though there were bedrooms and dining rooms that kind of shared the same space. I remember my maternal grandmother and grandfather had property in Kyle, Texas. They had a family farm, and they also had a house on Hargrave in Austin. And that property, my brother ended up buying my grandmother's property and eventually selling it after he retired, and that helped to stabilize him. I also consulted a financial advisor prior to leaving Austin. He helped me plot a longer path because I wanted to get a graduate degree, and he helped provide a financial plan where I tucked away money as well as invested in stock, a small portfolio, which I continue to maintain today. And all of that helped me. Also,
So let me ask you this. This is another personal question. Do you feel as though you're financially independent at 69?
I'm comfortable. I don't
Comfortable?
know. Yeah,
that's a fair word.
But
you're not entering your old age poor, in other words.
True. So
let me give you both a quick math question here. So the three of us, and not just the three of us, but since we're talking, we can reasonably expect to live to be at age 110. So how many years you got left, Lewis?
Oh, wow. So doing the math, something like 30, at least 30,
41 years?
Yeah, something like 40.
41 years? Okay. Yeah. And Jourdan, you're 26. If you live to be 110, what does that take you?
Is that 80? 84?
84 years. Yeah. 74 years.
74 years. There we go.
74 years. All right. So that's a lot of planning. You have to earn money over that period, and then you also have to live off the earnings for, in your case, Lewis, another 30 some odd years.
Uh-huh.
Let me ask you another quick question, math question. This is deep math here, Jourdan. How many years until age 65 for you?
Oh boy. Sorry, math on the spot.
That's all right. So 65. You're 26 now.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? That's like 65, 49 years, or 39 years. 39 years. Okay. So you got a lot of years to go, right?
Yes. So
the importance of planning becomes important if we look at a lifespan of 110 years, and to maintain a sense of financial flexibility, if not independence, is an important characteristic. So Lewis, you said that one principle under the financial independence freedom is plan early for retirement.
hmm
When did you start planning early? When did you start planning for retirement?
I started. I had within the first career path as a museum director. I was working for the city of Alexandria. I'm sorry, the city of Austin, Texas, and they brought in consultants to talk about investing in a 401k plan, and also they created a system, a retirement system for city employees in which they were vested.
And let me stop you there. And how old were you?
Probably about 27, 28.
So you started planning for your retirement before you got 30 years, or before you turned 30 years old.
Yeah, that's
and did you contribute to the retirement program consistently?
Yeah, it was automatic. So it was a deduction out of my paycheck. And so it was effortless. All I had to do was just get paid, make sure I got paid every week.
And then when you moved from job to job, did you continue that planning for retirement strategy?
Pretty much, because I also had a plan going each on an annual basis, where after I got out of college, I would have an assessment with my financial planner. And then also the one that I started in Austin, I basically let that sit. And it kind of grew off the interest because after my regular contributions from my paycheck from the city, it just sat there, and any principal that it had gained, it also accumulated interest. And so that interest helped it grow.
Okay, so under the financial independence freedom, you have 3 points. One is plan early for retirement.
Mm-hmm.
The second is develop a savings habit. And the third is creating an investment strategy. You've mentioned the investment strategy. What is a savings habit?
Just save on a regular basis. Just get into the habit of putting something aside rather than spending everything that you bring in on a monthly basis. So I have an automatic savings plan that's connected to my debit card. And so through my bank, every purchase that I make, $1 is deducted and put into my, some kind of way. It comes out of my checking account and goes into my savings. And so without any effort at all, I accumulate a minimal amount of money, but also whatever at the end of the month, I take a little bit of money from what I have left over and put it into my savings account so that I have something just on a regular basis. I'm keeping a savings in addition to what I have in my checking account.
Right. One of the financial planning principles is that we should have at least 6 months in cash. Do you subscribe to that principle?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, that gives me a great deal of comfort that I can liquidate some of my assets and be able to pull 6 months of cash out so that I can live on that.
Okay, so let me pull Jourdan back into this conversation here. Your uncle said that he started savings for his retirement at age 26 or 27. Now you're 26 and 27. That's a different situation because he was working for the government agency.
Yes.
I take it you're more like a freelance or self-employed. So what are your challenges to start a savings program?
Being freelance and self-employed, it's finding jobs, finding continual work, and going through that. So having a baseline of money that I can live on and also put back is a challenge that I face. Okay,
so that's why it's important to have your uncle, right? Because he's flush with cash, right? He can give you a loan. He's not gonna give it to you, but
no, I won't give it to you.
He may not give it to you, but he'll loan it to you to bridge you over, which is an important aspect of creating intergenerational wealth, in the sense that we have somebody in our family who can float the family loans. I have a case where I have a nephew who is trying to start a business, and so fortunately, many of us in the family are able to give him loans in order to get that his business started. So that's another way of helping intergenerational wealth grow in terms of families. So it sounds like, Jourdan, that at some point, well, how does this resonate with your colleagues? This whole notion of, well, first of all, do your colleagues, your cohorts think about retirement and retiring, and how many years they have to work until they retire? Is that conversations you have?
No, that is not the conversations me and my cohorts.
That's not surprising.
Okay, all right. So again, if for those who work in the gig economy, savings is hard because you have times when you've got cash, or as we say, you're either itching or you're bitching. You're itching because you don't have enough business, or you're bitching because you got too much. So you have that ebbs and flows. Is it your intention to develop a fund of money to tide you from job to job or from gig to gig?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a certain system worked out right now with the money I make, where I put it, and how I do my savings. It's building up over time, and eventually it will be a nest egg that I can, sit on for a little while.
Okay. All right. Good. And I know where you can get a loan if you need it at good rates. So. All right. And I use the word financial independence and freedom, but I think, Louis, your category or your term was probably comfortable. You have enough. The stresses of paying the bills and making ends meet is not there. So unfortunately, many in our cohort, meaning those who are baby boomers, are facing situations where they don't have adequate income to retire on. So that's an important lesson to pass on to Jourdan and to other relatives, other generations in your family lineage. Yeah. So Sonia says, put money aside is investing in self. So it's an investment. And one of the major challenges, as many of the financial planners say, and one of them is this saying, is that you live below your means, but within your needs. So you don't try to live necessarily the life of an ascetic, but you make sure that you're always putting something aside. And fortunately for most of us, we can go without that extra cup of coffee or that extra dinner or something, so that we can comfortably live below our means and then develop a savings fund or investment fund. All right, so let's go on to the third category, is self-care. So Louis, so the first category was planning, figure out where you're going, look for ways to get help along the way to plan. And that helps you increase your probability of success. And you mentioned you are a Virgo, and then
Yes.
and then also Jourdan mentioned he was a Pisces. So I'm not an astrological guy, but we'll get this. We'll get it together before the end of the interview. But both of those have important pointers for planning. For your case, it's having a detailed roadmap, and for Jourdan's case, it's getting that balance in terms of effort and where you want to go. And then there's the question of ensuring your financial comfort, recognizing that there are flush times and there are lean times, and we want to have a process in place to carry us over while we're working. And then in your case, Louis, sustaining us for years where we aren't earning income by working. We're earning income from our investments and our savings. So fourth category is self-care. And in that you have four categories or four bits of advice. The first one is take your health seriously. Give us an example of when you realized that taking your health seriously was important.
I think it started really early. First of all, my grandmother was someone I saw the kind of health issues our family experienced with hypertension, diabetes, all kinds of ailments that are typical of the Black family. And so I try my best to eat right as much as I could. Not everybody loves junk food, but I try to do everything as much as possible in moderation.
Well, let me stop you here. Are you rewriting history? Didn't you love those Twinkies and those pretzels?
You interrupted me. I was getting ready to say I loved my grandmother's pound cakes. I loved her tea cakes.
Yeah. I don't know your grandmother, but I can taste them.
And I did not step away or shy away. That was why I ran when I was in art school. I would get on the run around the track and run a mile. I also did a what do you call it? Not a full marathon, but 10K marathon. So I trained to do that. I also swam. One of the first courses I took in college, we had required PE. And so part of getting out of college, I had to take tennis. Well, I chose to take tennis, swimming, because I swam as a kid. And I got through those classes. I also took gymnastics. And so being physically active during school was a regular part of my routine. So I would run during my lunch break at 12 o'clock because our art classes were 3 hours. So I would stop and run for 30 minutes or so prior to going to class, getting dressed, and then go to class in the afternoon and have my lunch during class because we had 3-hour drawing sessions and I could take, but I continued to run and also be cognizant of what I was putting in my body, as well as doing yoga. I did yoga when I was in high school. I would watch a PBS series, Lilia's Yoga and You, and that's where I first began to do yoga. And so
let me stop you. I think a lot of people our age, it wasn't me because I didn't get to yoga until late in life. But when I talked to my people in my cohort who had been practicing yoga, a lot of them got started by watching PBS yoga. So there's a lot of people in our generation, what were the challenges of keeping with a fitness program? Let's call it a fitness program over the course of your years, or the course of your work years. What were some of the challenges there?
Career, also work hours. I think I fell down most seriously after I started working as a museum director because the hours were long. I usually would do something like 10 hours a day, even though I would go in late in the morning, like 9:30 began my work day, but sometime I would leave work about 9 or 9:30 because with running a Black History Museum, it involved doing presentations before City Council to accept the proclamation for Black History Month, as well as hearings involving budget, and as well as also developing monuments in the city of Alexandria for enslaved people, as well as also commemorating aspects of the city's history. And so it involved a lot of community meetings that ran late into the evening. In spite of the fact that I was a member of a gym, those 3 times a week gym sessions got fewer and fewer. So eventually, after I retired, I was at the luxury of using a personal trainer that I met with for about three days a week, and that was helped me lose about 15 pounds. But of course, with the pandemic, as well as also having to scale back my resources, I had to drop my trainer and try to do it on my own.
Oh boy, all right, that's a story we all tell. So Jourdan, what's your cohort's view on taking health seriously? And what are some of your fitness or self-care practices?
most of my cohorts, like taking care of yourself, it has become a lot more prevalent. There's Planet Fitness everywhere, and a lot of different gym memberships you can get.
Mm-hmm.
It's really accessible for us to just go work out a little while and keep yourself fit throughout the week.
Is that a sort of is that an ethic that you guys or your people in your cohort have? Is fitness something that people are actively engaged in?
Some. I mean, it's not for everyone, but you can do just little things like keeping yourself moving and stuff like that. That goes a long way in keeping your body fit and being able to support yourself.
Well, I think part of Lewis's, I know part of it is probably genes, but when one day, well, this is just probably, I don't know, maybe a year ago or something, when Lewis told me how old he was, I said, that's not possible. You're not there. You can't be that old. I thought he was a baby.
And
dude almost as old as I am.
Your check's in the mail, Jerome.
So it shows that you didn't, as I say, we were lucky to be born with good genes, so we chose the right parents.
Yep.
And then we had the foresight not to abuse them. So
yep.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. I would add to this the importance of this. You mentioned, Lewis, about your family or your grandmother's generation, mostly about issues of hypertension, diabetes, asthma, these kinds of things that are part of unfortunately, of the African-American health experience. We hear that more and more each day because of the pandemic, and they talk about people of color having these comorbidities. Now, what you have demonstrated, and what a lot of people that I'm around with in the health and healing and care community, is that these comorbidities are not destined. The part of the challenge, we recognize that we may be under-resourced, that we may live in food deserts, but there are certain things that are in our control. And a lot of ways in which they talk about the comorbidities in the African-American communities is as if we don't have any self-control, or that we can't control things. Now, sometimes that's hard because of people working 2 or 3 jobs, living in food deserts. But to ascribe this to just something that's innate to us as opposed to something that's structural is something we have to fight back against. And I think as we live our lives, we can show that for those of us who are able to make healthy food choices and have the resources, we should do it so that we can show that there are ways to get rid of the comorbidities. And
one of the things you just reminded me, Jerome, that helped me develop healthy eating habits was my grandmother. My grandmother had the equivalent to a victory garden, which was in the back of the house. And I know it spanned something like at least 30 yards from the back door in the back. And she raised everything from collard greens to potatoes, onions, radishes. And basically we had all the vegetables for our table, except for corn. We go out to the country for corn. And that was what our Sunday meals. My grandmother believed in kind of a communal thing where it was always someone invited over after church. And so everything came from the garden except for the meat, pretty much. And so she always encouraged me to try something at least once and see if I like it. So that's one of the reasons that I have a healthy appetite and I love food.
Okay, all right. And to give a plug, you're working with Asala, and on what date is the food show coming up?
It's coming up on February 6th at 12 noon, 12 to 2, and it basically looks at the Black family and African-American foodways. And so we'll talk about how Carla Hall, one of the people from the Food Channel, your daughter, will host the session, Gina Paige from African Ancestry, as well as talking to Aunt Viv from the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and they'll talk about our traditions of African-American foodways and how they developed over time and spread throughout the diaspora.
Right. One of my favorite quotes from Chef Carla Hall is that as African Americans over time, we confused celebration foods with everyday foods. So we've taken foods that were typically eaten at celebrations, and we eat them all the time, and that's part of our challenge in terms of getting a balanced diet. Jourdan, what about your eating habits, or people within your cohort?
I'm not really like my cohorts in that regard.
Well,
I cook a lot. I cook dishes from around the world. Like, I enjoy expanding my palate and doing different things.
okay, well, that instead of going to the Caribbean restaurant, the Indian restaurant, the Asian restaurant, you'll prepare your own foods.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm the beneficiary of it.
Well, you have to don't feed him too much now, because he got to get out and get out. He has to get up and get out and do a little bit of walking to get it. So he does.
Yeah.
So great. That's great. We're just about running out of time. So the last category, let me mention the other categories under self-care, is nurture your spirituality, live with integrity, and learn about your family history. These are all part of the self-care, and we don't have enough time. People can read your blog and delve into that and make comments on the blog, and we can respond there. The fourth category, the fourth bucket, is give back and pay forward. Okay. And there you mentioned citizenship, mentorship, the valuing of interpersonal relationships, and surrounding yourself with talent. So, but before we go on, let me pick up under the self-care. Let me pick up a comment from Anna. She says, protect your mind and spirit as well as your physical self. So protect your mind and spirit as well as your physical self. That would be a summing up of her view of a lesson she would pass on to her daughter and subsequent generations for her nieces and nephews. So we'll have to invite Anna to write a letter to a future generation. I'll put her on the spot publicly and see what I can do I put some pressure on her publicly to see whether she'll write something.
And I like to dovetail on that, because one of the things that I wrote in my blog to Jourdan was the fact of don't trust everybody and don't believe everybody has your best interest at heart. So always think about the fact that you, in helping others, kind of pick and choose who you choose to be associated with. I always thought it's important to engage interns in my work because when I left Austin, I realized, there was not a succession plan. So every job that I try to go to, always think about who's going to precede me proceed to follow.
Yeah.
Is that a small thing to say?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
No, it was coming up on just the investments and things to follow. Always give back and pay it forward.
Mm-hmm.
When you said family loan earlier, I was like, I don't exactly like that word, because we do investing in this family. We invest in each other and we always give back more, and that keeps our family really strong.
Okay, that's an important part. Yes, it's a way of exchanging resources.
It is.
Right. So investing in each other, that is important, because when we look at the statistics on wealth in the African American community, the intergenerational transfer of wealth is almost nil. So any family that can begin to pool resources, however you do that, begins to break that curse. It begins to break that curse of lack of intergenerational development. That's very important. And I'm glad you pointed out that's a very important value for the family. So let's just take a couple moments, and Louis, you want to sum up, and then I'll let Jourdan close out with his what he thinks about your advice and how he might pass it on either to the next generation or among his cohorts today.
I think one of the more important things that always kind of bothers me about our generations following us is to just take for granted things that were given to us, like family property. Don't be so quick to sell off the property because um, the people that bought the property, they worked really hard, they sacrificed, they maybe went without, and then something's handed to you, whether it's a car, property, or apartment that you live in, whatever you're given by somebody else, don't take it lightly and realize that there was a sacrifice behind it. Always think about the importance of your spirituality, and don't think that you're here on your own.
Okay, so Jourdan, provide us a summary of lessons or advice for Uncle Lewis. What do you think of them? Will you be able to apply them, or just what your thoughts are?
My thoughts, they are all good lessons for life. I will think on them and apply them in, different ways and aspects in my life. But they're more lessons that come from life and living than they are just, you should do this to get ahead and this to get ahead. And I think that's what's really helpful about it.
All right, so thank you, Uncle Lewis and nephew Jourdan. And thank everybody for tuning in and providing comments. Again, my name is Jerome Paige, and with me today is Lewis Hicks and Jourdan Hamilton. And we've been having what we call our conversations across generations. This is the first of a series for Black History Month. And I want to thank you for joining us. Again, we ask you to like and follow our Facebook page, subscribe and like our YouTube channel, and read Lewis's blog and provide comments. So thank you very much for joining, and have a good evening.
Thanks.